Welcome. Today we are going to take a Raspberry Pi and turn it into a media player for our projector. So let's get started. Now obviously the first thing you're going to need is a Raspberry Pi. There's a couple of options here. You want something from either the 4 series or the 3 series. Here's the 4 and here is the 3. Now the most common ones are on the 3 series is the Raspberry Pi Model 3B Plus. There is a little bit older one. Probably anything in the 3 or 4 series is going to be fast enough to play your video files without an interruption, while the Raspberry Pi is also doing the other things that Falcon Pi Player does. And so you definitely want to stick with a 3 or a 4. So we're just going to assume that you have one of those 2 Raspberry Pis. Now on the Model 3s, you typically have a full-size HDMI port. And that's great because a standard HDMI cable is going to plug into the Pi, and then you just need to get that to plug into your projector. Now, so look on the back of your projector, make sure it does have an HDMI port. If it doesn't, you'll have to buy some sort of adapter to convert HDMI to whatever your projector uses. Now, technically, the Raspberry Pis do output composite via this little plug thing over here, but it's such low quality, we're not even going to talk about that. We're just assuming you're using HDMI. Now on the Raspberry Pi 4, do be aware that they have 2 video outs, which is kind of cool, but because the boards are the same size, what they did is they had to save space in order to fit 2 ports on there, and so they made them micro HDMI ports. That means that you're going to have a cable that goes from micro HDMI to full-size HDMI or some sort of adapter to make that happen. So just be aware of that. That's a little bit of extra stuff you have to make sure that you have to make the Raspberry Pi 4 work typically. Also too, the Raspberry Pi 4 comes in 3 levels of RAM. How much short-term memory storage is inside of it. They got 2 gigs, 4 gigs, and 8 gigs. 2 gigs will work great. 4 obviously might future-proof you for future larger versions of the Falcon Pi Player. So I would consider either 2 or 4. Probably 8's overkill here. You're just kind of wasting money. So, I would stick with the 2 or a 4. Also, too, do be aware that the Raspberry Pi 4 do run a little bit hotter. They draw a little bit more power. So, cooling might be more of an issue. If the cooling is going to be a big issue for you, you might consider looking at the 3s. They have a tendency to run quite a bit cooler. Now, for either the 3 or the 4, we are going to need a micro SD card, and that's basically the hard drive of a Pi. It's what the computer boots from. It's where your videos are going to be stored, where everything gets transferred back and forth, and so therefore it's really important to get a quality one. And so the Falcon Pi Player Manual actually recommends a Class 10, 16 gigs or greater micro SD card, and they also recommend either the Samsung Evo Select or the SanDisk Ultra. And I totally agree. I only buy either Samsung or SanDisk micro or full-size SD cards. So notice this unit right here covers all the bases. It's a SanDisk 32 gig Ultra, which is bigger than the recommendation of 16. By the way, you can get by on as low as 4, but the problem with it is you just don't have much space left for your videos, and if they get too large, then you're going to be stuck, and you don't want to be putting it on a USB drive or something like that and stick it in the Pi. This is a recipe for trouble. They don't recommend it in the Falcon Pi Player Manual. I don't recommend it either. Just keep everything on the micro SD card and just buy one that's of a large enough size, 16 gigs or larger, and look at that price. If you were to get something smaller, it would just be pennies less. If you were getting something off-brand, it would just be pennies less. Just either buy a Samsung Evo Select or a SanDisk Ultra 16 gigs or larger micro SD card, and then you got some quality piece of equipment to work with, and it will transfer back and forth fast enough, and should be pretty reliable and not fail on you at a critical time, which SD cards can do. You might want to buy a spare too, by the way, just in case, but very unlikely that these guys are probably going to up and fail on you. So now that we've got all the hardware worked out, what software do we need? Now I'm going to buy the recommendations of the Falcon Pi Player Manual, and these are good recommendations. They're very solid. And they recommend a couple of things. First of all, they recommend an SD card formatter. And this one is from the sdcard.org. And by the way, I will have all these links in the description down below, so you don't have to try and type them in from here. They'll all be down there. Now with the SD card formatter, you have to scroll down, and you either pick Windows or Mac. And I'm going to go ahead and pick Windows here. Match my computer, and then you have to scroll through the legalese, and then finally get to the accept button, and you click on that, and it will start downloading down here. Now notice, by the way, it is a zip file. You will need to unzip it to get to the setup exe, which is actually going to install the software. Now that program is just to get rid of everything off of your micro SD card. Just in case you've used it again or whatever, this just clears it out, and that way there's nothing on it and it's ready to be imaged. But to image it, we'll need another piece of software. And the one that's the most flexible, because it runs on the most platforms, is Balena Etcher. And again, the link will be down below, but it's balena.io/Etcher. And it's detected I'm using Windows, so that's going to select for me. But you can also get it for Mac and Linux. So again, download that. That, by the way, is an exe. So when you run the setup, you can do it directly. You don't have to unzip it first. So now we have the program to delete everything off the SD card, the formatter. And we also have the one that's going to image the Falcon Pi Player software onto the SD card. But we need the Falcon Pi Player software. Well, that's over here, and it's under GitHub and Falcon Christmas FPP, and then you want to go into releases. And the newest release at the time of this recording is 5.2, and so that's what I'm going to use. And what you do is you scroll down here, and there's several files that you can download. Now, anything that has BBB in it, we don't want, and that's because that's for the Beagle Bone miniature computer. They're similar to Pi's, but there's a different brand and a totally different system. So we're not going to use anything that has BBB in it. Now, down here, we have the Falcon Pi Player version 5.2 Pi, and that stands for image. And of course, it's a zip file too, so we'll have to unzip this. So we definitely want that. And also, too, definitely pick up the Falcon Pi Player 5.0 manual. You'll definitely want that also. Now, the rest of this we don't really need, so we're just going to skip over that for now. And after these get downloaded, we'll continue from there. Alrighty, now we got everything downloaded. First of all, we have our SD card formatter. Again, you're going to want to unzip that. And you'll also want to unzip the Falcon Pi Player image. When they're all done, let's go ahead and install the program. So first of all, we're going to install the SD card formatter. The install on all of these is pretty standard, so just click through it. Okay. Not going to launch the program quite yet. Then we're going to come back, and I'm going to install Balena Etcher. Alrighty. And we'll go ahead and we'll close that down for now. And so now we are ready to get started. So what you want to do is you want to put your micro SD card into your computer, and typically that's through a little adapter they can get that takes various kinds of media. So we want to go ahead and we're going to plug that in now. Now, Windows is about as smart as a hamburger when it comes to Linux, and so it's going to format this drive for me. But I don't want to do that. Also, my antivirus program has detected it down here too, but I'm not going to worry about that either. So I'll just click cancel on Windows formatting anything I put into the computer that's related to Falcon Pi Player. Always just do that. Windows never knows the right thing to do. Just hit cancel. So let's go ahead, and we are going to use the SD card formatter. And the very first thing you want to do is make sure that you are on the correct drive. All right, notice the size. That's your biggest clue. I know that I put in a 64 gig micro SD card, and sure enough, that's pretty close to 64 gigs here. So I'm just going to do the quick format, and we'll get rid of the volume label. We don't need anything in there, and we're just going to hit format. And it's going to warn you that you're about to erase everything, and you did. Okay, all right. So now that should all be cleared out. Now let's come over here, and we are going to run Balena Etcher. So we want to flash from a file. And the file that we have is right in this directory right here. So I'm going to copy the path to that, and I'm going to paste that in here for Balena Etcher. And right there it is, the Falcon Pi 5.2 image, Falcon Pi Player. And we are going to go ahead and select that. Now you want to select the target, which again is the micro SD card. And so notice again, I'm using the size as my big clue that this is the correct drive to put it onto. All right, and then you just hit flash. All right, now that it's done flashing and verifying the SD card information, we're going to go ahead and close down Balena Etcher, and then you can actually eject the drive if it's still open. Probably won't be, it's not in my case. I believe Balena does eject it for you. And after that, we can go ahead and put the SD card in our Pi. Alrighty, we've taken our SD card, we've removed it from our main PC, and we've inserted it into the Raspberry Pi and powered it on. So the Raspberry Pi is powering up now. So once it gets fully booted here, there's a couple of options that you might want to do. First of all, you probably want to plug the Raspberry Pi directly into a monitor or into your projector, because it's going to show you what its IP address is once it gets booted. Now, there's two ways to configure the Pi in order to be able to see it for the first time and get it going. One way is to plug a Ethernet cable into the Ethernet port of the Pi. If you do that, the Pi will automatically configure itself onto your local network, and it will have a network IP on your network, and you'll be able to find it in your computer. And of course, on the video screen that you're looking at or the projector, you'll be able to see the IP address that it is. The other way, if you don't have an Ethernet cable to plug into the Pi, you can actually leave it unplugged completely from the network, so you don't plug in an Ethernet cable, and instead what it's going to do is going to create its own Wi-Fi network. So if I come over here to my computer connections, I will see the Falcon Pi Player FPP, and I can go ahead and I can connect to that. Now if it asks you for a password, the password is Christmas. Christmas with a capital C. So if it pops up, ask for a password, put in Christmas with a capital C, and it will connect you here. Once it gets connected, now don't expect to have any sort of internet access here. All we're going to have access to is the Falcon Pi Player. Should be down here in just a minute. There we go. Notice it says no internet access, but it is connected. We have the disconnect button. Now we can open up a web browser, and we have a few different options here. First of all, we could type in the IP address that is on the Raspberry Pi, and mine shows 192.168.8.1, and you just hit enter on that. Okay, and it will bring up the connection. The other options they recommend on the screen is to type in http //fpp.local and hit enter, and it takes you to the same place basically. If that one doesn't work, just try the IP address or whatever. And also too, you can try http //fpp only, no local. and you can try that and see if it takes you to the right place. Between one of those three, you should get to this screen. Alrighty. Notice the first thing here, we have something in red, and so that's probably really important. And it says the SD card has unused space. Go to storage settings to expand the file system. Well, let's click on that link, and sure enough here, we've got Grow File System button. So let's click on that. It says, yeah, we'll require a reboot, but that sounds good. We need to expand the file system. That way, we'll have enough space on the SD card in order to store our files. Right now, it's only going to be the very limited size that was set up in the download, and that's just not enough space, quite frankly, in order to store your videos. So now that we've expanded it, notice at the top here, it's reminding us to reboot. Of course, we could also reboot down here, but let's go ahead and click this, say OK to reboot. And it's going to take just a minute here to reboot the Falcon Pi Player and the Raspberry Pi running Falcon Pi Player. Alright, the Pi is all booted up in Falcon Pi Player, but my computer has disconnected from the FPP Wi-Fi network, so I'm going to need to reconnect to it again. And let's wait for that to connect. Alright, now let's hit reload on our web browser. We can either hit it here or we can use the little reload button up there. See if it pulls it in. If not, we can try the IP address, so let's try that. There we go. Now we're running Falcon Pi Player. Here's the initial setup, by the way, for the Falcon Pi Player. It's going to be in player mode. We're not going to talk about that right now, so that's a good default. It's called FPP. Now, if you're going to be running multiple Falcon Pi Players on multiple Raspberry Pis, you definitely want to come in here and rename each one so you can tell which one's which. We can leave all of this set. That's all probably fine. However, when we get down here to time zone, you want to go ahead and correct that. I happen to be in the United States in the central time zone, and typically the way we set that is we go and we pick Chicago for our location. And this prompt up here, and notice that I need to restart the Falcon Pi Player web system, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. That will not take nearly as long because we're not restarting the Pi, we're restarting this interface here. Alright, now it's back. And if you wanted to, you could put in your location. The reason why you might want to put in your location is because if you set up schedules and you can actually say things like, I want to start at dusk or whatever, if it knows your location, it can actually find out when dusk occurs during that particular day of the year in your city. So you might want to set that up. For right now, I think just getting the time zone correct is good enough for me. So I'm just going to click the Finish Setup, and now we're done with that. You can enable anonymous statistics if you want to. You can go to the privacy page and see what those are. That's up to you, of course. But by default, the Falcon Pi Player shows you this status screen. And this status screen is where you're going to see your playlist, and your playlists are how videos get played in the Falcon Pi Player. Okay, you're probably kind of fed up with all this setup stuff. Let's actually load in a video. So in order to do that, we're going to go over here to Content Setup, and we're going to go to the File Manager. Now here's where we upload files to the Falcon Pi Player. So we're under Content Setup, and now let's go over here to Videos, And you notice we can upload two different kinds of files, MP4s and MKVs. Those are the ones that are supported. So we could either hit select files and it's going to pop up a filer box here, or we could have drag and drop a box over the select files button, and it would upload the files for us there too. Let's see here. Let's pick something here from Atmos. Let's do the jokes here, and we're going to pick, there we go, we'll pick this guy here. And you notice it's uploading the file. Alright, now that we've got our video uploaded, what we need to do is add a playlist to play a video. And the playlist can hold more videos than one. You can put a whole bunch of videos in here and you can add them to it. You can either play them in sequence or you can select it to randomize the sequence. But let's get started with that. We're just going to play one today just to kind of get started. So I want to go in here under Content Setup and I want to select Playlist. There are no playlists currently, so I'm going to click Add a new playlist here, plus new playlist, and we want to give it a name here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call it Halloween, and of course you could enter a longer description if you wanted to, and you could tell it to randomize or not. I want this to play through in sequence, and it's only one video anyway, so I'm going to leave that off, and I'm going to click Add the playlist. Now, what we need to do is we need to add something to the playlist now that we have it. And of course, what we're going to do is click the Add Sequence/Entry button. And sure enough, it's already figured out we probably want to add that video. So it's got media, single file here, and of course our jokes video. You can change the video out and add notes and stuff like that. But again, we are keeping it simple here. So we are going to click Add. Now we've got everything all set up, and by the way, of course, I could edit or delete this entry here using these little buttons, but we need to make sure that we click Save Playlist, and it shows that the playlist is saved. Now we can come back over to Status and Control, which is where it defaults to showing us the status of our what's going on in the system. So I can select that here under Status Control, Status Page. By the way, you can get to the same location just by clicking on this Falcon Pi Player logo up here. It will take you to the same location. And you notice that the playlist we have just selected is the default Halloween, the one that I created. And of course we could drop this down and select a different one if we wanted to. But basically we are ready to go. We just need to hit play. I'm going to go ahead and click stop, so it stops playing. Now, one thing you may notice is we didn't actually get any audio, and the reason why is because the audio is not going through the HDMI on the Pi. It's actually going through that little headphone jack that they have on the Pi by default. So we need to change that. Let's come over here, and we are going to go to FPP settings under Status and Control. And let's go to Audio and Visual. And here is our audio output device. And I'm going to change that to HDMI. It says a reboot is required. Let's just go ahead and check these other items down here. Our audio mixer is HDMI. That's perfect. Default audio video output device is going to be HDMI. Again, perfect. So let's go ahead and reboot and say yes. And we'll need to wait a second while our Pi reboots. Looks like we're loaded back up here. I'm going to hit refresh again just to make sure. Yep, we are good. Again, we have the Halloween selected this time, and this time I'm going to hit play.
Hey, I got a joke for you.
And there we go. Now we've got everything set up and working. Now that you've got the Falcon Pi Player all set up to play videos, there's a few more options you might want to set. Let's go under Status and Control, under FPP Settings. Under Audio and Visual, you can disable the IP announcements. And what that is that by default, the Falcon Pi Player will actually speak its IP address in one of those robotic voices when you first boot up the Falcon Pi Player. That can be really handy if you don't know what the IP address is, and but you don't necessarily want that blaring over your speakers at your presentation whenever you boot up your Pi. So you might want to go ahead and disable that. Also, another setting that you can take a look up is under Status and FPP Settings and System. you can blank the screen on startup. Now, only do that if you have nailed down your IP address situation, because what that's going to do is going to turn off the display right after the Pi boots. And of course, display right after the Pi boots is whenever you can see the IP address. Also, if you've disabled the spoken IP address, then you're not going to be able to see either one. And if you have it set up for DHCP, it could change, and then maybe you'll have a hard time finding your Pi. Now, again, you could use a network scanner or go to your router and look for devices and find it that way. But, you know, for most folks, that's a little bit complicated. So only do this whenever you know that you got it all fixed up and you know exactly where your IP address is going to be every time that your Falcon Pi Player boots up. So that is the very basics. Now, with a Raspberry Pi, always make sure when you're done, just don't pull out the power plug. Always best to do a controlled shutdown, so you want to use this button down here. Also, too, if you don't want to use a wired network with an Ethernet cable, or you don't want to keep connecting to the FPP wireless network, and by the way, if you leave it on the FPP wireless network, make sure you change that password away from Christmas, because someone can just hop on to your Falcon Pi Player and change or delete everything if they knew that password and it's published in the manual. So don't do that. However, we can come over here and we go to network, and we can actually enter our network information over here. We could go to WLAN, we can enter our SSID, enter our Wi-Fi network name, your double secret Wi-Fi network password, and then you would click update interface in order to connect to it. Now, of course, there's two options over here, DHCP, which means it will pull a network address from your router, which could change, and if you don't like that, you can make it static. But if you make it static, what you need to know is an IP address on your local network that is not being used by any other device, and that you can give the Falcon Pi Player without any sort of conflicts. So that's kind of advanced. Again, we're not really going to get into that, but that's the basics of how you set up your Falcon Pi Player to play videos for your projector. So we're all done here. I'm not going to save any of that because it's all bogus. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to hit shutdown like you're supposed to. Are you sure? Yes. And that's going to close down my Pi in a nice orderly fashion, and then I can power it off after it's done. That's it for the video today. Thank you very much. And if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Thank you.